there's certainly Australian ghost stories, but it looks like you've got a book here that you turn to. So there's actual research done on this tradition.
Right. There are two authors in particular, Ken Gelder and Jane M. Jacobs, that came up a couple of times. They wrote a book titled Uncanny Australia, Sacredness and Identity in a Post-Colonial Nation. It really excellent book. Check it out if you want to explore more on this topic. But I was reading an article they wrote titled The Post-Colonial Ghost Story, in which the authors point out that one encounters a form of post-colonial racism in Australia, in which Aboriginal people are seen as lacking in some areas, such as wealth and access to various properties of modern society, but then they're also seen as having too much in other areas. In other words, they have certain rights pertaining to sacred lands that sometimes rubs the Western modern Australia the wrong way.
Right. Yeah. Well, we have a similar thing here in the States with the native peoples here. Mm-hmm. Their sacred lands, and then the whole history of those people being relegated to reservations or places that aren't actually their homes.
Yeah, I think it matches up with a lot of surviving tensions between native peoples and colonial powers.
Okay.
And Gelder and Jacobs say the following about it, quote, "In this climate, Aborigines certainly continue to receive sympathy for what they do not have, good health, adequate housing, and so on, and yet at the same time they draw resentment from white Australians because they seem to be claiming more than their, quote, fair share. Still, there's this expected exchange of beliefs and superstitions. The Europeans, for their part, incorporated bits of local folklore into their own stories, and of course borrowed and westernized aspects of it for their own fiction. Meanwhile, as Philip A. Clark writes in his 2007 folklore paper, Indigenous Spirit and Ghost Folklore of Settled Australia, modern Aboriginal people are in many cases less familiar with the complex creation myths of their people, but cling to hybrid beliefs that sprang up in the wake of colonialism. And this fits with what we've talked about before on the show involving cargo cults.
Yeah.
The idea that you ultimately have to find some sort of hybrid creation of culture in many cases in order to survive culturally. Like you are just going to be plowed over by these intimidating colonial forces in many cases unless you find this common ground. This kind of cultural sort of survival tactic.
Yeah, I'm thinking back on our episode about the Serpent and the Rainbow, and the whole idea that like certain kinds of voodoo cultures are an integration of local mysticism with like Roman Catholicism, for instance.
Right.
Okay.
Now, out of these hybrid beliefs, hybrid ghost stories that emerge, Gelder and Jacobs argue in their book that these Australian ghost stories are not so much about possession, such as the owning or acquiring of a haunted house or a haunted object, but they're about dispossession. Now, specifically, some of the Aboriginal motifs that are still represented in these hybrid belief systems, you have this idea that there are just a lot of spirits, and that one kind of lives among them. Many of these spirits have humanoid qualities to them.
Okay.
And there are also traditions of like little people and sorcerers, shapeshifters, etc. Now, Clark writes that the Aboriginal people also believed that there was a powerful element of the human spirit that for most individuals lay dormant in them throughout their lives, and this was called the Prupi. And belief in this still lingers to this day, sometimes as a potent aspect of the self that may be called upon as a living spirit or helper in order to protect yourself or attack someone.
Okay.
Now, a Gupa, however, is the spirit of a deceased person and operates much like a ghost in other traditions. A Gupa, while disruptive, will eventually, quote, come to rest with the old people. And these are different from the sort of evil spirits, the bad spirits, kind of demons that exist in Aboriginal belief systems as well.
Okay, so there's a complex afterlife belief then.
Yeah, but they do have something that is a lot like the Western ghost and therefore melds well with the colonial ideas of what a ghost should be.
Got it.
Now, and for that reason, belief in Gupa persists. And Clark points out that massacre sites and missions are frequent haunts. You'll love this as a dog owner. Dogs can often see these spirits when we cannot. And you can see them too, perhaps, if you get right behind your dog and you stare through the space between the dog's ears.
Okay. Yeah, this actually came up in multiple cultures, the idea, because you get the dogs who just kind of stare off into space weirdly, and you're not quite sure what they're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, in multiple cultures, the idea is that, oh, well, they can see the dead.
Yeah, clearly they're seeing something that is hidden from us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even today, when a Goopa is spotted, the Aboriginal community, they have to discuss the relevance of the sighting. What does it mean? Why is it occurring? And particularly, how is it linked to any recent conflict or tension concerning local Aboriginal affairs? Now, so this is rather important here, I think, because essentially you're seeing the idea that sightings, ghost sightings, lead to community discussions.
Oh, okay.
So you might have a ghost that pops up because of a suicide, because of a death that is somehow connected to drug addiction. So you have deaths that are occurring due to societal problems within the Aboriginal community. And then if the ghost is sighted, then the community must discuss the problem. So it becomes a reason to have these important discussions about real-world issues.
So it's sort of a manifestation of the community's unconscious, right? And these are maybe societal things that they need to discuss, but they don't realize they need to discuss them until this person dies and then their spirit starts haunting.
Right, yeah, and when you can also get into the whole question of, well, are the people actually seeing something? Are they just making it up as some sort of psychological affair? I mean, there's so many different interpretations of what could be happening. A callback to our Will-o'-the-Wisp episode from a year or two ago, there are some who think that the initial Goopa sighting could be connected to some sort of Will-o'-the-Wisp phenomenon.
Oh, okay.
But, it could be any number of things. It could be a hallucination, trick of the eye, whatever it is. Something strikes an individual as being ghostly, and then they can connect it to some sort of tragic event in the community, and then bring it forward as a discussion point.
Wow, so this is actually like an extension of what I was talking about earlier with just horror stories in general, that they're reflective of cultural issues, but they're taking it a step further and saying, okay, this is reflective of issues that we're dealing with. Now we need to address those issues as a group.
Right. Now, I know we have a number of Australian listeners. We have some Kiwi listeners as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to hear from you. If you have specific ghost stories that you think reveal something about culture in your neck of the woods, let us know. I would love to hear from you.
So let's take one more break, and when we get back, we're going to head over to South America.
Hey, I'm Jack, host of the new comedic news and pop culture podcast, The Daily Zeitgeist from How Stuff Works. A little bit about me, I've listened to